So you have chosen to go on a spiritual journey. You have finally chosen to embrace your spiritual path. But as you begin it, as you truly start to commit to it, it is not so easy. Maybe you are faced with fear. Maybe you are faced with confusion. Maybe you look at the world around you and you see that you are alone. When we start a spiritual journey, when we start a spiritual path, it is actually very, very normal to experience fear, confusion, and loneliness. For if the journey was easy, everybody would be doing it. It would just be, like they say, a walk in a park. But it is not, because as they say, nothing worth having is that easy. And sometimes the easiest thing to get close to, which is our soul, our spirit, and the greater God, the greater universe that we are truly want to be in the presence of, this truth of who we are, this can be sometimes the toughest thing for us to embrace. So today I wanted to specifically focus on fear. See, there's a lot of confusion about fear. There's this idea that we must get rid of fear and destroy fear. But the first thing we must first become aware of is that fear is the most natural thing of being a human. See, we live in more fear than we live in love. Fear was, in a way, programmed in us beyond just when we were first born into the world. It was literally programmed, in a way, into the earth. It is almost an aspect of the earth vibration. This might be a bit in contradiction if you're thinking of the spiritual journey is about experiencing this all-loving energy. And in some ways it is loving. But because we are experiencing the world physically, and in that experience of the world physically, we realize how small and, in a way, fragile we are to these incredible elements. I mean, look at all these incredible trees around us, right? And there's tempests and there's hurricanes and there's all kinds of earth elements that we are, in a way, afraid of because they are so powerful and they are so great. And of course, the greatest fear is the fear of death. So when we become aware of fear as we get older, we want to move closer to God, and we say, God, help me, for I am now aware of fear. In a way, that is the story described in the Bible, when Adam and Eve, in a way, they became aware of the world around them. They became aware of shame, and then next they were fearful that God would find out about them. Now, I'm not here to go deep into the story, for there's a lot that we can unpack in that story itself in terms of spiritual terms. Whether you are a Christian or not, it does not matter. We are speaking broadly about spirituality, about the greater God that we all experience, no matter what name we give this God. So when we enter this spiritual journey, no matter what religion we choose, oftentimes we enter it because we have experienced, not because we have experienced fear, but because we have become aware of fear. See, there's always an underlying fear in us, whatever that is. So if, let's say, you've been going through life and you've been, driving around, or you're young and you've been getting, and maybe you're in a first relationship, and after the first breakup, maybe for some people this can be a very intense experience, or maybe you were getting in a car accident, this is an intense experience. And maybe at this moment you want to become aware of God, or you want to believe there's a God because you experience this fear, and it is an intense fear. And so you begin to do the work and you realize, okay, well, fear is part of life, so maybe if I'm standing more in the truth of God, then maybe this fear will diminish. And there's a lot of truth in that, which is why we start on a spiritual journey, because there's a lot of freedom there. And part of what the freedom is because when we truly stand with God in the presence of the truth of God, we get to see the illusion of everything. We get to see that we are a spiritual being who came to experience in this physical world. And it is not about ceasing, about leaving every kind of fear for, it is okay to, if the walls are coming down, that natural fear that comes, that's okay. You must run and walk out if there is an earthquake. That fear, is not the same fear as if those emotional fears that we start to build up because we are not, in a way, able to distinguish between the fear of living in the physical world and the fear of the illusion. And see, this is where it gets a bit intricate and tricky for a lot of people, because then they start the spiritual journey and they get faced with more fear. And part of that fear is the fear of letting go of more illusion. See, every time we are about to let go of more illusions of the physical world, we are faced with more and more fear. That is why when we often embrace it, we're all going to die, and we let go of that fear, there is a massive sense of freedom, and not just an intellectual awakening to a spiritual experience, but a deep experiencing of a spiritual experience. And that is, fear is part of experiencing a deeper spiritual experience. You cannot just, have a spiritual experience by full ecstasy. That is certainly part of it, but that ecstasy is often experienced because we have experienced a tremendous amount of fear. So you see, oftentimes we tend to demonize negative emotions, but part of what it is about being in this physical life is seeing that emotions are also part of this physical illusion. And it is not about becoming apathetic and completely dumping all emotions. It is about understanding how all these emotions play to create a world around us, and how we as an individual, by standing in the truth of God, by embracing our spiritual journey, we get to then really see the truth and the intricacies of these emotions playing out. Oftentimes when we have not started a spiritual journey, for many people it can be very confusing. You just go on autopilot. But as you become awakened because of oftentimes fear, you start to move towards the truth of God. So what's important to have then when you are on a spiritual journey is commitment. So commitment, what it does is, oftentimes we look for spiritual teachers to guide us in this process. For like anything, we might give up. For example, maybe have you learned how to swim? Maybe when you learned how to swim, you were very young and you didn't know. If you were left to your own devices, maybe you could have learned how to swim, and maybe at some point said, you know what, the water's too deep. It's too deep. I'm afraid I'm just going to not learn how to swim. Sometimes this happens when we haven't learned how to swim as adults, when we haven't learned to swim as children. So as adults, we take up swimming. What happens is, because we are more on the conscious, so when we are more aware of fear, then let's say maybe a child will be less aware of certain fears. They're a bit more fearless in that sense in the physical term. Oftentimes children are taught about fear of the physical by their parents, and other times they were taught simply by experience. So what happens is, as adults, if let's say we're learning how to swim, we might decide to just not swim because we say, well, this is fearful. So you have a teacher there and they say, hey, keep on going. Sometimes this teacher is internal. It's an internal voice that's made up of whether it is your own personal voice speaking to yourself, or you allowing your true spirit self coming through and speaking to you, or the voice of someone who inspired you from when you were young. The point is, we often look for spiritual guidance while we are on a spiritual journey, because it is very easy to get faced with an incredible amount of fear of the illusions around us, because it is very convenient and is very important for the ego to maintain the illusory world around us, because that is how it keeps you protected, so to speak, in its own world. It thinks it is protecting you. But for you, because you're choosing to live more boldly, you want that freedom. And in that freedom, you accept the fear that comes with it, and in facing that fear and moving on. So your commitment is essential in this process. And what is also essential is to realize that fear is part of being a human. What is also important to understand is the fear that is built in from the life that you are experiencing as a sort of an addict of this illusion, and the fear that is truthfully a spiritual fear, a fear that awakens as you are facing more fears, as you are moving more towards God. And you know that because it is a fear that comes with a new sense of commitment if you really embrace it. It is a fear that when you really look at it, you realize it is an invitation for you to break down more walls, more of your illusions, than a fear in the physical terms that is trying to crush you. So, commitment. Commit to your spiritual journey. That is the only and the simplest way that you can come out to the other side, so to speak, with a new level of wisdom, with a new level of strength to embrace more of this journey that you have chosen in this physical, three-dimensional world, and then be able to transcend to higher dimensions.